listening to Seminary Dropout, and I'm your host, Shane Blackshear. Somewhere in between seminary and youth camp, it's Seminary Dropout. Let's go. My guest today is Gary Black Jr. He's a professor of theology at Azusa Pacific University. He's the author of the Theology of Dallas Willard and co-author of The Divine Conspiracy Continued. Gary, thanks for being back with us.
Shane, it's great to see you again and good to be back with you.
Your latest book, Preparing for Heaven, is kind of chronicles a bit of your time that you spent with Dallas Willard and some of his last days, and a lot of his philosophy and theology on death is just some fantastic stuff. I'm wondering if you could describe the origin of this book in, being in Dallas's library with him and finding the box of treasure there. Yeah.
Well, it was a great time being with him. It was a very sacred time. I know a lot of people that have had the privilege of being with people as they're sort of experiencing their last days. Those are very sacred and meaningful times, and it was the same with Dallas. We were working on The Divine Conspiracy Continued, and we went down to a little library, which is a little house that was adjacent to their main house, a little on the property that was just next to their main house. It's a little, probably 1,200 square foot white house that was filled to the rafters with all manner of subjects of books. You could find just about every subject imaginable in that little library. The trouble was finding any one book in particular. But so one day we were down there and we were gathering some materials for The Divine Conspiracy Continued, and I saw this box. It was this old Del Monte's peach box that he'd gotten probably from a grocery store nearby, and he had written on the side "Death and Immortality," and I said, "What is that?" And he said, "Oh, that's just something that I've taught, a subject I've taught now and again," and so he said, "Why don't you get that down for me?" And so I did, and then I went on to work in another room on some material that we had gotten for The Divine Conspiracy Continued, and he sat on the kitchen table and took several hours, which at that time, as sick as he was and as weak as he was quite a bit of effort. And I watched him sort of pick through that box, and it was really a very poignant moment to watch Dallas read an earlier version of Dallas on some of his thoughts on death and immortality, which was very meaningful. He was able to read an earlier version of himself on these subjects that were now hitting him more. I don't know. Have you want to say?
Personally?
Yeah, more personally for the first time. And he spent quite a bit of time and was very emotional as he was reading this material. And it was, I could really sense that his faith was being strengthened by the truths that he was reading. And so then a couple of months later, after he got his terminal diagnosis, he called me and asked me to come to the house, and we sat outside in his backyard, and he gave me the news that he probably wasn't going to live more than a few more weeks or months. And just as friends, we began to talk about heaven. And that conversation went on for about 2 or 3 days, off and on. And at the end of that, he said, I think you need to write this as a book. I think you need to write this as a book. And I was initially resistant to that, but over time he sort of convinced me of the solidness of that idea, and so later on, as he in his last final days, he kind of pulled out of me a promise that I would do that. So that's the way the book came about.
I kind of got the feeling that in every Del Monte box in his library, there was a book that could be written.
I don't doubt that at all. And I'm really hopeful that the Dallas Willard Center, which now houses those papers, will be a place that many, many generations of people can go to, like I was able to go through and pick through those papers and find those wonderful nuggets of hope and life and truth.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of what Dallas thought about heaven. One of the things that you discuss at length in the book is the idea of the cosmic car wash, which is something that most Christians kind of think of when they think of heaven. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So one of the things that we talked about during those 3 days, he pulled out a napkin and a pen and on the kitchen table, and he drew a circle on the napkin and kind of colored in about a third of the circle. And he said, now let's just imagine that this is the soul of someone who's made it into heaven, but that maybe was a heroin addict, or this is the sort of the shaded side of the circle is that part of them that they never gave over to the life and hope and love of Christ. They sort of kept that to themselves, and it was resistant to the truth, and sin was able to sort of infect that part of their life. And he said, well, what we've imagined in the past is that when that person, if they believe certain things about the atonement, or if they have a certain understanding about Christ's payment on the cross for their death, when they die, they'll go through this cosmic car wash, and they'll come out the other side into eternity. And that part of their soul will be, made new again, whole and complete, as if they never sinned. And he said it's just not going to be like that. And what he believed was more the case, and what I believe is more the case, is that certainly that part of our life is sort of cut away, or it's removed from us. But one of the big things that, of course, now Dallas being a philosopher and an epistemologist and a phenomenologist, what he was so good in doing is taking theology and sort of running it through the logical, realist lens of a philosopher. And we often don't do that in theology, and even maybe less so in evangelical theology. And so what he said was, now, if we're going to remain human beings after we die, and we don't become angels or some sort of disembodied, free-floating, ethereal spirit, but if we remain human beings, there are some things that are required to be human. Now that's, that sort of gives you an idea of the depth of Dallas's thinking. What does it require to be human? And one of the things that he said was required of humanness was will, volition, the ability to make choices. And he said, if we're going to remain human and we're going to be human in heaven, we're going to have the ability to have will, to have free choice. And that will is the way in which we forge our character, which makes us actually the persons that we become. So when we've not chosen to follow God, when we've not chosen love and grace and peace and patience and kindness and gentleness and self-control, in those areas of our soul that are still consumed by fear or pride, we're going to have to choose to enter into that arena of life with Jesus and have that part of our existence transformed. And if we don't do it on earth, we're going to need to choose to do that in heaven. And so the cosmic car wash is the idea that no, we don't have to choose that. All we have to do is die with a certain level of belief about the cross, and then Jesus is going to sort of just whisk us away, totally complete us, and actually make us into a person that we never chose to become while we were on earth. And Dallas said, now how would he do that? How would Jesus make us into a person that never existed?
Hmm.
And why would he do that if we're going to remain human? And so the implications of that are that we enter into a heaven, we enter into eternity. The parts of sin that have sort of ruined or rotted out our souls are removed, but we enter into heaven sort of, well, affected. There's scars. There's it's like we've lost a limb. There's been part of us that's been removed, and we're not complete. We're perfect. We're perfect, but we're not complete. And so we often get that confused in our language, that if something is perfect, it's complete. Well, a little 3-inch oak tree can be perfect in its development, but it's not complete. It's not a 30-foot fully grown canopy of its potential. So we enter heaven with the sin removed, but we actually have got to complete. And Jesus is with us in this. He is faithful to complete what he began in us, and he will do that in heaven.
So I'm curious about the ramifications of that. Can we sin in heaven, or can we choose not to? Can we make the same choices we made here on earth?
This is what I love about you and your podcast, because you go right to the wonderful sort of epistemological, ontological issues, as only a seminary dropout can do.
That's right.
No, great question. It's a great question. So Dallas would say, I remember him on more than one occasion saying to somebody, "Well, can God sin?" And Dallas would sort of chuckle and say, "Well, of course he can sin, but he doesn't want to."
Yeah.
And that's really the point in heaven, is that there may be, of course, I've not, died and spent 90 minutes in heaven. So if I had, I maybe would have come back with that answer. But I think that there's probably the possibility that sin can be engaged in heaven. But what I like to say is, I am not at all tempted to drink out of a soiled toilet bowl. I mean, it's just not. I'm not thinking about it. I don't stay up at night wondering where I can go to sort of stick my head into that filth and just drink to my heart's. It's not even an option for me to consider, and so I'm not tempted by it. I'm not lured by it at all. And I think when we get into eternity, we're going to have an understanding of exactly what sin is. And Dallas would say, to that person that asked if God could sin, he would say, "Well, I can take this pen in my hand and jab it in my eye, but why would I want to do that?" Right. I don't. It's just not an option, because it's in no way, shape, or form attractive. And I think that's probably what we're looking at in heaven, is that yes, we do have free will, but in some ways we've come to the understanding, we've come to the knowledge and awareness of God's love and truth and light in such a way that darkness isn't in any way appealing, and so therefore it's not a temptation.
So it seems like part of it is we see God for who he really is, and we also see sin for what it really is as well.
Yes. And so what's amazing is in the garden, you've got the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, then you've got the tree of life, and there's this choice to be made, and the first humans make this wrongful choice because they're in a lack of understanding of God's goodness and a lack of understanding of the consequences maybe of leaving God's provision and knowledge and obedience to God. And so they choose wrongly out of this rebellion and a resistance that God's will and desire and knowledge for us is all that is good and all that is best. And so what God has done is he has been working down through the ages to try to continue to convince, demonstrate, manifest, exemplify his goodness and his love and his grace and his will and his way, right? This is what Psalm 119 is all about. His ways are good, they're pure, they're right, they're trustworthy. He's been trying to manifest that. And some people choose it and some people don't. And the scriptures are all about the sort of the ramifications and blessings for those who do listen to God and those who don't listen to God. And then Jesus comes along and really gives us the ability for the first time to see it embodied in a human being. And then we reject that, right? But finally, there's this living way that's provided. And so what God is going to do in the end, he's going to find the people that want it. I mean, they really want it. And then they're going to get it. If you seek me with your whole heart, you will find me. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and you're going to find the right path. I mean, in the end, God ends up with a community of loving, powerful people who want to do what he wants them to do willfully. And that ends up being heaven. And he sort of fixes the problem. He fixes the problem of the garden at its core genesis, which is the human heart. So heaven is going to be people that have chosen that after all is said and done, God's right. And those are the people that are going to be with him. And he's going to work with those people to accomplish that original Genesis, edict, or that original Genesis covenant, which is go and steward, have dominion over all the earth, because we are the kinds of people that he can trust to do what he would want us to do, which is exactly what we want to do, which is the highest good. And then we're empowered by God to do that very thing. The good news is we don't have to die to start that project, that we can actually choose it now. And when we do, through discipling our characters to Jesus, we become the kinds of people that he can empower now to do that. So the big question the book asks is, why would I assume that heaven is a place I want to be if I don't choose to live the way God wants me to live now?
And that's so perfect and beautiful, because it opens up the possibility of heaven on earth now. If heaven is essentially the group of people who say yes to Jesus and his will and his purposes in the world, then we have the freedom to choose that now, right where we're at.
That's the good news, that whosoever will may come. That's the good news. He has opened up a new and living way. It's not just to the Jews. It's not just to the special people. It's now to everybody. We are all now a part, grafted in, as Paul likes to say, into that family of people who have the opportunity to choose Yahweh's ways as our ways. And when we do, he comes alongside of us. And as Jesus says, we are able to do even more exceedingly powerful things than he did, because we're now friends. We're friends. We're co-heirs. I mean, Dallas used to say we're in training for reigning. And that can be misinterpreted as sort of a Christus Victor sort of Constantinian Christianity thing that, Christians are just excited about ruling the earth. Well, if we got it right, if we understood that God's reign is beneficial and loving and in the best interest in seeking the highest good for everyone concerned, then nobody should be worried about that. The trouble is, there's a lot of things done in the name of Jesus that Jesus has really got nothing to do with, and that causes a lot of people to worry about whether or not we have good intentions, and they should.
It's probably worth it for us to pause for a second and kind of establish our definitions for words, especially when we talk about eschatology, because I know that Dallas believed in something very specific when he talked about heaven, and there's a difference between new heaven and new earth. and all that kind of stuff. Can you kind of break that down for us a little bit?
Sure. So everything that God made in Genesis 1 and 2 is good. It's all good. And there's this, and God is going to redeem, He's going to renew that which has already been made. And that's all of creation, including humanity. And so part of that, some of the imagery in Scripture is that it's going to be cleaned with fire. Fire is a purifying agent. It burns out all the impurities. The refiner's fire, we talk about gold, that gold is melted and all of the imperfections are sort of burnt away, and what's left is the thing that's solid and valuable. It's not about getting rid of things. It's not about sort of annihilating all things. It's about getting back to the original goodness of what was originally created. And so the original heaven and the original earth was good and beautiful and perfectly in God's plan, and it's sort of been slowly taken over by willful disobedience to God's plan. And what God is looking for is a group of people that He can empower to accomplish His original mission, which is to have love and grace and peace and hope and power flow through Him to others, and to willfully be able to creatively and lovingly and with awe engage all of God's creation to His highest good and benefit. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of to play. It's to have fun. And it's to work with purpose. I mean, we're going to be working in heaven. That's I think a lot of people think, we say this in the book, that, heaven is going to be sort of some retirement community where shuffleboard and golf is the best we can hope for. That's not the way it's going to be. I mean, we're going to have meaningful work that we're going to engage in, and we're going to add value, and we're going to take resources, and we're going to use them for God's glory and for others' benefit. I think there's going to be commerce in heaven. I think that there's going to be an economy, oikonomia in heaven, where people are going to use their gifts and abilities and knowledge, and we're going to sort of exchange that in some ways for the mutual benefit of others. And I'm not going to be omniscient or omnipotent. I'm going to need to rely on other people to help me learn and grow and flourish. And I'm going to be thankful for their abilities, and they're going to be thankful for mine. And sort of the way we've ruined competition today, where it's either you win or I win, and it's a zero-sum game. Somebody wins and somebody loses. That's just going to be obliterated. There's not going to be this prideful arrogance. There's not going to be any need for hoarding. There's not going to be, we're going to be able to live the way we all really, in our heart of hearts, sort of know we should be able to live. And so there's going to be an economy. So the new heaven and the new earth is this redeemed creation where God is able to purify that which was sort of laid to waste and bring back to life His original plan. But what He's done in the gap between the first creation and the new creation is He's provided, I'm getting excited about this. He's provided a way to obliterate once and for all sin and evil, because He's created a group of people that have recognized sin for what it is, and they've chosen to walk away. We've seen now the tree for what it is, and we've gone, yeah, I do not want that. I get it. It's not appealing. Your ways are the higher ways. Your truth is the only truth. This is what I want in the depths of my soul, and I want to pursue that for the rest of all eternity, because I understand, I don't understand everything, but I understand enough that your ways are the high ways of the highest ways that I can pursue, and that is in my best interest, and it's in the best interest of all creation. That's the eschatology. That's the summation. That's the glorification that I think Revelation and Isaiah are talking about, where The kingdoms of our world have become the kingdoms of our God and of his Christ. His reign and rule now is infected everything because he's got a group of people who are willfully submitting, that taking those crowns, that my own power, my own dominion, and I'm laying that at the foot of Jesus and going, it's your ways that are higher, and I'm giving you my dominion over my little kingdom, and I'm submitting it to your kingdom because your kingdom is where the greatest flourishing and greatest peace can be found. And I'm doing that willfully. I'm not doing that with gritted teeth. See, that's what we're learning now, is that God's ways, sort of learning by mistake, learning both sins of commission and omission. I'm learning, oh, I could have done that better. Oh, Jesus was right. Oh, I'm suffering the consequences for not recognizing that forgiveness is better than revenge. Oh, I'm suffering the consequences of that. Oh, but I don't have to live that way anymore. My heart slowly begins to be shifted in a way so that my tendency towards forgiveness and love and the ways of God is set. My character becomes set, and therefore in eternity, when I die, Dallas and I believe that trajectory is set for all of eternity. And so that's the eschatology, the full completion. And I one of the things I think we forget is that the Bible is like the first inning of this game. And now it's a long first inning. And, both sides have kind of had their time at bat. But there's a time coming where that first inning is going to end, and the rest of the game is going to start to begin. And God is going to own the rest of the innings. And I don't know, none of us know, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no heart can imagine what the glory that God has in store for us. The Bible kind of ends at the end of the beginning of the story, and the rest is off the page. And the point of this first inning, I would say, is to figure out who's going to be in the rest of the game. And what team are you going to be on?
And so, it makes so much sense if the way that most of us have been taught about heaven with the cosmic car wash idea, is it really none of this really matters? Why? We've got this phenomenon of let's just hang on till Jesus gets here. And in that way, it doesn't matter if I practice any spiritual disciplines. It doesn't matter if I help the poor or anything like that. It's all going down after a while. And so why do any of those things? Why risk anything? Why help refugees? Why do any of that if it's just a matter of hanging on till God just makes it all as good as it could possibly can be overnight?
Yeah, and I would just say all of that done against my will.
Right.
So he's going to make me into a person that I actually never wanted to be when I was alive. And this is where I think we get some confusion about justification and sanctification theologically, is there's this presumption that God imputes, right? There's the word. He imputes his righteousness on me. He sort of shoves it down my throat, whether I actually want it or not, because I confess a few things about the cross.
Right.
Well, but if I actually never wanted that life, why do Jesus says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and then don't do anything that I say? Right? I mean, yes, the cosmic car wash theology totally eviscerates, totally renders powerless any reason for transforming our character increasingly into the character of Jesus and becoming Christ-like. All we have to do is cry a cry, pray a prayer, the sinner's prayer, sign a card, become a member, start tithing, read our Bible, and hang on by our fingernails until Jesus comes, and then he's going to make us into the sort of perfected version of ourselves that we never wanted to be in the beginning, against our will. And Dallas would say, my goodness, if he's going to do that, why would a good God force us to suffer if in the end none of our decisions really matter except what we decide about the cross, and he's going to make us into a person that we never chose to be anyway? Why doesn't he just take us and do it now? There's no reason to grow. There's no reason to suffer. There's no reason to learn. Some of this theology is actually, could be applied to some of what was done to Muslims during the Crusades, where the Crusaders would come to a Muslim, force them to confess Jesus as their Lord, and then cut their head off because it wasn't going to get any better for them, right? And I think that some of that sort of twisted theology has even worked its way into good-hearted people, where they just say, Jesus is going to come on Tuesday, so why do I need to worry? And, I talk about this in the book about my grandmother, who, really struggled with her life and her Christian understanding of what it meant to be a follower of Jesus. And much of her life was really a struggle. She was an unhappy woman, and she didn't know how to become more Christ-like, and nor did she know that was actually the objective. And that threw her into a sort of almost a hellish sort of life for quite a few years. And that's just not okay. It's not okay to sort of have this assumption that you're sort of more holy based on the level of misery that you experience. That's not what the abundant life Jesus is offering, or it's not the easy yoke that he's describing.
That reminds me a lot of what Dallas talks about in The Divine Conspiracy, that so often having an encounter with Jesus Christ leaves us unchanged, or people who profess to be Christians are no better than anyone else. And it really makes sense if our objective is to just hang on, then what that will make us do here and now is to be as comfortable as possible, to seek comfort as much as we can, because we're just hanging on. It's just a plane ride, and when we land, everything will be fine. Let's just be as comfortable as we can right here and now.
Yeah, and so let's try to legislate our morality, and let's try to we've done this several times over the years. We've tried to create holy huddles where we sort of segregate ourselves. We become separatists from the world, and we're just hanging on till Jesus comes. And the worse, quote unquote, the worse our culture gets, the more convinced we are that the sooner Jesus is coming. And it further justifies our rationale for separating ourselves from the sinner and having little or no effect on the broader culture. And so, yeah, these ideas have legs. It has an effect on the way the church has dealt with discipleship as a priority, as opposed to sort of Christian entertainment. What is the church's purpose? What is the effect the church is supposed to have on the broader culture? How are we supposed to bring salt and light into the world? Is it just that we have the Romans road or the four spiritual laws, and that's our contribution to society? And let's just try to get as many people to say that prayer as we can, because the worse the worse our culture gets, the sooner Jesus is coming. These are deep theological ideas that have circulated, but by good, well-intended people. I mean, with hearts that are really seeking after God, but they just get sort of caught up in a little bit of a vicious circle. And Dallas used to say, people need to travel more. And he wasn't really talking about, getting in a car or a plane. He was saying that we have to have more ideas. We have to be well-read and well-educated. And we would recognize, if we walk down a little bit of church history, that a lot of these things are repeated over and over again, many times to not good effect.
You discuss a lot Dallas's theology of God and the way that God interacts with the future, and God even having the ability to not disclose the future to himself, which I find really, really fascinating. Could Dallas be considered an open theist by any stretch of the imagination?
Well, he was an open theist, but I would say he was a limited open theist. He confessed as much. There's a few places where he identified himself as an open theist, but he was very limited in the way in which he defined that, and I'm glad he did, because I'm a limited open theist as well. And I think part of the problem with open theism is it's often connection to process theology. Dallas was not a process theologian, but Dallas was open in the fact that he believed God could, if God chose, God could choose not to know something if it was best for him not to know it. But that God had the ability to know anything that he wanted to know. And there were times in which God would know the future because it was best for him to know it. And there would be times that God would choose not to know the future. So, for instance, Dallas would said when the story of God walking through the garden in the cool of the day, and he asks Adam and Eve where they are. He says he thinks that's an honest question. That it was best for God to allow a level of autonomy for Adam and Eve, and to not sort of hover with an omnipresent sort of big brother, big eye in the sky sort of feeling, that they would actually have some level of privacy and autonomy, and God allowed that to happen with integrity. And so when God asks the question, God's really asking the question, where are you? He can choose to do that. And some would say, well, some theologians would say, well, wait a minute, you're limiting God's power there. And I would say, no, actually believing that God can't not know, that's limiting his power. It's actually a more potent God to say, no, I can choose not to know that. And so Dallas believed that was true. The other thing that Dallas would say that God was open about, and I would agree with, was that he was open to the prayers of people, and therefore God could be convinced, if we could use that word, to do something that he would not otherwise have done, because he is in partnership, a creator, not a partnership of equals, but a partnership with humanity to rule his kingdom. And so as willful beings, human beings, in interaction with a divine trinity of beings, we have this interactive relationship where we converse about what it is we want to do and what God would have us to do. And God is open to engaging with us in those authentically creative discussions. Otherwise, Dallas would say that prayer is psychologically impossible, that we're actually not in a conversation, that we are in some way, shape, or form trying to get on board with a game plan that has been set in stone for all of creation, and that means that we're not willfully engaging with a willful God, that we are in some way trying to follow through on a script that's already been written, that we can't even get out of. So even our disobedience then is predetermined. And then before we get into predestination, double predestination, where really what it means to be human is completely eviscerated by determinism. And Dallas would say, so as a philosopher and a logician, using logic, he's just kind of walking through all the implications of some of the beliefs that we profess regarding determinism and saying, no, God is good and can be trusted to know what he needs to know, and to take also control of history when he needs to take control of history, and we can count on him to do that as well.
You hit it right on the head. That's why the whole open theism, or just God knowing the future, is important, because if the future is set that way, that takes away God's agency to change the future if he so chooses. I think a lot about prayer and the things we're talking about, but specifically why I have to, as a sinful human being, have to goad God into doing good things. Like, if he's so good, why do I have to persuade him to do good things? Now, there are things like, getting a new job, or getting a raise, or moving to a new house, that maybe those things aren't, in fact, because I can't see things from all angles, maybe those aren't good things. But most of the time when we're praying for people to be healed from cancer, those kind of things, those are apparently good things, usually without question, right? So why do we have to go God into doing those good things?
Well, yeah. So I don't know. I mean, there's a presumption, and of course even with Dallas's death, and people that are sick, there's a family that's in our church right now where one of the pastors of our church is having some really difficult, prolonged, mysterious medical issues, and she's got 2 young kids and a beautiful family, and the doctors just can't figure out what's going on, and it's really debilitating. And all of us in our congregation and many others have been praying, Lord, you just can't imagine that it wouldn't be best that she be healed.
Right.
However, I do not know. I simply do not know all that's involved. And so when these sorts of mysteries continue to occur in our lives, this is where knowing, not just believing, not professing belief, but knowing based upon experience that God is good, begins to work its way out. Because when people aren't healed, then I can actually say, something's going on that I do not know, that is actually, in the overarching scheme of things, best. Given all the difficulty, even with all the suffering, even with all the pain, even with all the not knowing, even with all the loss, I can say, Lord, you have the power, and when you choose to act, it's good, and when you choose not to act, it's good. And so I don't necessarily, I certainly lay my request before God, as Paul says. We bring our request before God, and the peace of God, which transcends my understanding, which is limited, will guard my heart. Guard my heart against what? Against bitterness, against loss. It will guard me from thinking the peace of God, the shalom of God, will guard me against what happens when I don't get what I want. I have a friend that says, my spiritual formation and yours begins when I don't get what I want. Even when I think that all the evidence points to what I want being best. I do not have a God's eye view, and I do not know all the things that need to be done in order to make God's action right and good in the world. So that's one thing. The second thing would be, Dallas and I, and we actually wrote this in the book about power. We were walking one day out in a field, and we were talking about the tsunami that hit in Japan, and it had just occurred, and we were just talking about the wonder and the courage and the sacrifice of those men, the love that those men had that went in to try to, fix that reactor, and the inescapable fact that they were going to die from radiation poison because of their sacrifice. And I said something flippant. I said, where's Moses when you need him? To sort of walk out into the Pacific Ocean and put down that staff, and instead of splitting the waters, say, waters be still, like Jesus did. I mean, where's Moses when we need him? And Dallas, we were walking along, and Dallas stopped, and he looked at me, and I thought I was gonna, that was just like a really stupid thing to say, and he was gonna point it out, and he said, well, that's a very interesting question, Gary. What kind of person would God need today in order to give them the power to do just that? What kind of character would that person have to have? And what would happen to them if they used that power in our modern society? You can imagine, media helicopters flying overhead and catching that on video, and then that making its way across the globe instantaneously. And we can imagine that a person like that would not be difficult in many, many cultures, including in America, in its own sort of deification of celebrities, that individual would be likely thought a god. Who could handle, whose heart, whose soul could withstand that sort of onslaught? And then he just sort of whispered under his breath, and the whole earth groans, waiting for the sons and daughters of God to be revealed. See, I wonder if part of the reason why God is sort of limited in his ability to answer our prayers is because we can't handle maybe the after effects, the ripple effects of that becoming a reality. Because we're not mature enough to handle the power to speak to things and have them changed. And so therefore we groan. That's not the way God would have it to be. And so we've got to factor all that in. And, God's not fooled by, and God's not going to be moved to, God loves us too much to sort of settle for a quick fix. He's in it for the long haul. I mean, if anybody's in it for the long haul, it's God. He is seeking, he's not going to trade the flash for the substance. And so he's got a good plan in the end. It's going to work. Sort of the final result is certain. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of who is going to benefit from that reality. And we have the opportunity to begin to live into that right now. And I think we do see pockets of heaven. We don't have to die to experience heaven, and we don't certainly have to die to experience some of hell either. There are pockets where we see the beauty and love and grace and power of God flowing through people, and people are blessed. And we also see the complete absence of love and grace and peace and hope and generosity, and the world suffers because of it. So the good news is he's given us a choice, and he's walking through us as we sort of fumble along and reach for his hand to pull us out of our own mire and to set us up. And if we build that house on the rock, we can withstand all the things that come. The question is, are we going to do it?
In the second half of the book, you outlined 5 things that you and Dallas came up with, qualities, characteristics of a good life, of the right trajectory. And those were honesty, fearlessness, power, beneficial relationships, and joy. How did you come to decide on those 5 things?
Well, it was the last conversation we had about the book, and what we just began to discuss is what did we think were the primary colors of heaven. If the air of heaven was to be sort of, if we were to analyze the air of heaven, what would be the primary elements that would be most consistent about heavenly life? And those are the 5 things that we thought would be most substantial and most prevalent in eternal living. And it turns out to be the things that Jesus embodied and taught and manifested on his time on earth as well. And I also think it's the things that when we are, if you could say this, we're sort of hitting on all cylinders, and heaven comes close, and the kingdom of God is coursing through our veins. I think those are the things that we witness if we looked around. I know it's true in my life. I sense God's presence. I see God moving. I experience vitality in my life overflowing when those 5 areas are sort of pulsing at full strength, if you could say. And I think that's, beneficial relationships and power and joy and honesty. My goodness, how hard is that to do in our world today, to just live a life of integrity and transparency and honesty? I mean, when we're able to do that, I think heaven becomes a more visceral reality in our lives, and so that's why we focused on those attributes.
The last thing that I want to ask you about is just the experience that you must have had spending the last months, weeks, and days with Dallas. And I can imagine, you got to know him as an adult. It wasn't like you were a family friend from way back. I have to imagine that of all the thoughts going through your head during that time, that you probably kind of wondered how you got to be there, to be one of the people who got to spend some of the last days with him by his side.
Yeah, I mean, nothing I've ever done in my life or will ever do um, put me. I didn't. There's nothing I did earned that privilege, and nothing I could ever do will will cause me to earn that privilege. It was a gift of God, and I don't know exactly why. I've asked that question many times. Why me? I know there's a lot of people that I could pick that would have been a sort of a better choice. I think there are a lot of people that could have done a better job of trying to catalog Dallas's theology and life. There have been a lot of people that have done wonderful work with him that he worked with. I think in the end, I could just say I don't know why. I just was willing, and I had the opportunity, and I don't. I just had the opportunity. My life was such at the time. Azusa Pacific was very generous with their willingness to let me be with Dallas during those last few months. So my work life, my family life was such that my family was generous in letting me spend time. Jane, his wife, and Becky, his daughter, were very I mean, it just worked out. I was given the opportunity, and Dallas asked me. I mean, he asked me to help him, and I think that probably was. I mean, it was a great honor and privilege to just be asked by Dallas to walk with them in those last few months in writing the books, but also in the last few days, sort of helping him physically, get to the finish line. It was a great honor. It was a great privilege. Many people could have done it. I don't know why it worked the way it did, but I'm certainly trying to be a good steward of that time and use it the way I think Dallas would want us to use it, for the glory of the kingdom, not his own glory or mine, but to further God's work in the world, and to bring glory to God and to point out his kingdom. It changed me profoundly in many ways, and for that I'm very, very grateful. I miss my friend. He was an incredibly special man in my life, and taught me things that I'll never forget. I think I'll always work on them, but I'll never forget them. And I miss him. But I know I'll see him again, and that brings me great joy. And I also have joy that other people are coming to know him and his thoughts. But most importantly, they're coming to know what he knew and experienced about Jesus, and that changed my life, and I hope it can change other people's lives too.
Well, you've for sure been a faithful steward of that, because this book, just like your time with him, is a gift. To get to hear, more from him through you and your words is so meaningful. We got to walk with you next to him over towards his library and sit next to him in his deathbed. And those are sweet, just reading them, just reading his words. So thank you so much, Gary.
Oh, thanks, Shane. I mean, I hope, I really pray, and I'm thinking about maybe writing something. I don't know if this is going to work out, but what does it mean to have a friend? I mean, Dallas was a really good friend, and we need friends. We need people alongside of us, but we also need people that walk ahead of us, mentors and guides and friends. And Dallas was a very good friend. And I hope that other people that read the book, they wonder, who do they want to be with them, to walk those final hours with. And you know, I had a friend one time tell me, you know who's your friend when you can call somebody 11 o'clock at night and ask them to come pick you up at the airport. You know? I mean, we need to have those kinds of people, and Dallas was one of those people for me. And it's caused me to think about my own life. You know, who am I investing in? Who are the people around me now that I could call on if I was ending my days, and could help me the way I was able to help Dallas. Those are good things to meditate on.
Well, Gary, thanks so much for being on the show. Just having the relationship with you that I do, where we can have these conversations from time to time, is really meaningful to me. So thanks for doing it.
Well, you're doing great work, man. I mean, I'm serious. You're really doing such important work, getting these ideas, people to express them. I know it's not easy, but you've got a lot of people that are hungry, that are seeking the truth, and you've got people that are willing to sort of bring our own little loaves and fishes, and hopefully God can multiply them, and people can be blessed. And you're the distribution system of a lot of these ideas and light and hope. And so I pray God continues to bless you and what you're doing, and that you feel that in your work.
Well, that means the world to me that you'd say that, Gary. Thanks so much. And again, thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Remember, you can find all the show notes for this show and all shows at shaneblackshear.com. Oh, and hey, have you ever thought about starting your very own podcast? I bet you have. And I think you should do it. In fact, I've created a course just for you to teach you everything that I've learned over the last couple of years producing Seminary Dropout. So if you're interested in podcasting and want to learn how, go check out my course. You can go there by typing in podcastingforeveryone.org. And you can get a special discount by typing in the discount code Seminary Dropout, all one word. That'll give you 25% off. So go check it out. If you have any questions, let me know. Okay. Thanks to those that left ratings and reviews on iTunes this week. Remember, that keeps the show front and center. Also, remember, you can find me on Twitter at @beardonabike. That's @beardonabike. Also, I'm on Facebook, facebook.com/ShaneBlackshear123. And remember that Seminary Dropout is listener supported. You can visit supportseminarydropout.com and press Become a Patron. Remember, this music you're listening to right now is by D.L. Rossi. You can find him online on iTunes and at dlrossi.com. All right, thanks again for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Stay tuned for next week's episode. Love you. Take care.